All right, so today we're diving into the world of Edward O. Thorpe. You ever heard of him?
Oh, absolutely. The OG quant, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're going deep into his autobiography, A Man for All Markets, to uncover how he used math, not just, for equations on a chalkboard, but for real-world advantage. Like, this guy took on casinos and Wall Street and actually won.
What's always fascinated me about Thorpe is that he wasn't content with just solving equations. He saw patterns everywhere, roulette wheels, card games, even the stock market, and realized those patterns could be exploited.
It's like he saw the Matrix or something.
Kinda, yeah, he was a mathematician, definitely, but also a bit of a gambler, a risk taker, and for sure a pioneer.
And that's what makes his story so compelling, right? It's not just about numbers. It's about a guy who challenged conventional wisdom, wasn't afraid to push boundaries, see what was possible. But his journey actually starts way before any of that, with these hints of his analytical mind showing up even in early childhood.
Absolutely. Thorpe's autobiography talks about how he was actually a late talker, like not speaking in full sentences until he was almost 3 years old.
Really?
Yeah, but when he finally did start talking, it was clear he was observing everything around him, just processing information in his own way.
Oh, you mean like that story about his family trip to Montgomery Ward? The one where he points out in kind of blunt detail what the shoppers are doing.
Exactly. That story perfectly shows his early tendency towards just like direct observation and, shall we say, a refreshing lack of social inhibition.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. But you can see how that kind of unfiltered observation, combined with his dad's influence, his father was a World War I vet, who really instilled in Thorpe a love of logic and prediction, really shaped his worldview.
And a great example of that is when, as a kid, Thorpe predicted the fall of Corregidor during World War II.
Like, seriously.
Yeah, he based it on conversations with his father about his experiences in the Philippines. It's a small detail, but it shows his developing talent for pattern recognition, connecting seemingly random information together.
He could see the underlying structure of things, the cause and effect, even at a young age. And this ability to see patterns, to analyze and predict, it wasn't just theoretical for him. Like, he was always tinkering, always trying to apply what he was learning to real life situations.
No, absolutely. You see that in the story about him fixing a broken chair in kindergarten by sawing off the damaged parts.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it obviously got him in trouble, but it shows his innate drive to solve problems, even if it meant bending the rules a bit.
Resourceful.
Yeah.
I'll give him that. It's that same kind of thinking that probably led him to build a homemade hot air balloon.
Right. Who just decides to do that?
Well, it speaks to his adventurous spirit, his willingness to experiment, to test the limits. What's remarkable about the hot air balloon incident isn't just that he attempted it, but the meticulousness of his approach. He designed a whole system for controlled descent, even factoring in stuff like gas release for safety.
And yet, things didn't exactly go to plan.
Right. During a test flight, a plane flew by, and his carefully constructed balloon basically just popped. Yeah, he was lucky to escape unharmed. And while he never figured out if the plane was actually the cause, the incident was a valuable lesson about accounting for unexpected variables.
Which is a crucial lesson in any field, really, but
Yeah,
especially when you're dealing with, physics and engineering.
absolutely. And this ability to learn from setbacks, to adapt, refine his approach, that's a pattern we see throughout Thorpe's life. It's like each experience, success or near miss, provided valuable data for him to analyze.
Exactly. And while the hot air balloon showed off his engineering ingenuity, Thorpe's true passion at this time was actually chemistry.
Chemistry, huh?
Yeah, he was devouring textbooks, set up his own lab in the laundry room, constantly experimenting.
Which brings us to the infamous aniline red incident. When I read this in his book, I was horrified and fascinated at the same time. What exactly happened?
Well, Thorpe had read that just a tiny amount of this dye, aniline red, could turn a huge amount of water this deep red color. And being Thorpe, he naturally wanted to try it out. He had this small goldfish pond in his backyard.
Oh no, I can already see where this is going.
And he thought it would be a cool experiment to dye the entire pond red. The problem was he slightly miscalculated the dye's potency.
Slightly.
A tiny pinch of this dye created this massive opaque red cloud in the pool.
Oh man, what happened next?
While people were swimming, chaos ensued. It was a dramatic illustration of scientific curiosity, but also a reminder of careful calculation and anticipating consequences.
You think anyone got in trouble?
I'm not sure. He doesn't say in the book, but it's definitely a story that sticks with you.
It's amazing how these early experiences, the balloon, the chemistry experiments, foreshadow Thorpe's later work. He's never afraid to test the limits, test his theories in the real world.
Even if it means the occasional mishap.
Exactly. But he learns valuable lessons along the way, right? About preparation, having the right
Like, for
tools.
sure. He even talks about how he almost missed out on the chemistry Olympiad because he didn't have a proper slide rule.
Yeah.
Even a brilliant mind needs the right tools.
So true. And speaking of tools and peak performance, Thorpe's journey takes him to a very interesting place, Las Vegas. But that, my friend, is a story for the next part of our deep dive.
So last time we were talking about Thorpe as this young guy, always tinkering, always pushing the boundaries, and it's no surprise that this kind of insatiable curiosity eventually led him to, well, Las Vegas.
Right, because where else can you find so much data, so many systems, all in one place? But here's the thing about Thorpe. He didn't just see a casino, he saw a challenge. He saw patterns and probabilities hidden beneath the surface of what most people just chalked up to pure luck.
His first target, roulette. Now, roulette is like the poster child for randomness, right? But Thorpe, being Thorpe, saw something different.
Physics. He saw the physics of the spinning wheel, the bouncing ball, the friction, all these variables that could be measured, analyzed.
Exactly. While everyone else saw an unbeatable game of chance, Thorpe saw an equation waiting to be solved.
And he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He built this whole roulette simulator in his house, a wooden trough, some marbles, carefully calibrated to test his theories.
I can just imagine what his neighbors must have thought.
Right. But that was Thorpe, meticulous, dedicated, and always willing to put in the work. He even talks about how his in-laws came over for dinner one night, and there he was in the middle of a roulette experiment.
No way. What did they say?
You can imagine. But it shows you how seriously he took this. This wasn't just a hobby for him. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible with math and science.
And it paid off, right? Didn't he figure out a way to predict where the ball would land?
To a certain extent, yes. He realized that by carefully measuring the initial conditions, the speed of the wheel, the angle of the release, he could improve his odds significantly. But here's the catch. Roulette is still a physical system, with lots of tiny variations and imperfections. It's incredibly difficult to account for all of them in a real-world casino setting.
So even with his system, it wasn't a guaranteed win every time.
Exactly. And that's actually what led him to shift his focus from roulette to a different casino game, blackjack.
Blackjack. Why the switch?
Because unlike roulette, where each spin is independent of the last, blackjack involves a deck of cards. And that deck of cards introduces a new element, memory.
Memory. What do you mean?
Well, every card that's dealt changes the composition of the remaining deck, right? And those changes, those shifts in probability, that's what Thorpe realized he could exploit.
So instead of physics, it was about probabilities.
Exactly. He understood that if more high cards were left in the deck, it favored the player. More low cards favored the dealer. The key was to track those cards as they were dealt, to know when the odds were in your favor.
And that's where his card counting system comes in. I've heard about this. But how on earth did he manage to keep track of all those cards while playing? It seems impossible.
It is tough.
Yeah.
But Thorpe developed a point system, a way to simplify the process, to assign weights to different cards. But even with the system, it was still a lot of mental gymnastics, especially back then, before you could just pull out your phone and use an app.
Right. So what did he do?
Well, this is where his experience with computers really comes into play. He realized that to truly master this, to test his theories on a massive scale, he needed more power.
So he turned to the IBM 704, the same computer he had used for his atmospheric research.
The one and only.
Yeah.
This thing was a behemoth, but it allowed him to simulate millions upon millions of hands of blackjack, to refine his card-counting system, and to prove, mathematically, that it could give a player a real edge over the house.
Wow. And I'm guessing the casinos weren't too happy about this. So we left off with Thorpe kind of turning the gambling world on its head, proving that even in a casino, a little math can go a long way. But here's the thing. Thorpe wasn't just some card shark looking for a quick buck.
Oh, absolutely not. This wasn't about getting rich quick for him. It was about the challenge, about proving that with enough brain power, you could find an edge, even in a system designed to be unpredictable.
And maybe even a little bit about sticking it to the man. Right.
But maybe just a tad. But the really fascinating part of his story is how he takes these skills, the analysis, the risk management, the pattern recognition, and applies them to an even bigger, more complex game, Wall Street.
which for most of us might seem even more intimidating than a casino. But Thorpe saw it as just another system ripe for decoding.
Right. Like he was already fluent in the language of probabilities and risk. Now he just needed to learn the dialect of finance.
And this was the late 60s, early 70s, right? Wall Street was a totally different beast back then.
Oh, completely. We're talking about a time before algorithmic trading, before high frequency anything. Back then, it was all about gut instincts, insider information, who you knew.
And Thorpe comes in with his algorithms and his computer simulations. Talk about a disruptor.
Total disruptor. He saw the potential of computers to level the playing field, to give anyone with the right knowledge and tools the ability to compete with the big boys.
So how to do it? Like, where do you even start when you're trying to outsmart Wall Street?
Well, he focused on this niche area of the market called convertible securities. Things like warrants, options, convertible bonds, instruments that investors could, under certain conditions, convert into regular stock.
Okay, so already we're in over my head. What's so special about these convertible things?
They were complex. Their value depended on a whole bunch of factors: interest rates, stock volatility, the specific terms of the conversion. And because they were so complicated, they were often mispriced by the market.
Ah, so Thorpe saw an opportunity, an inefficiency he could exploit.
Exactly. He and his team built these incredibly sophisticated mathematical models, crunching all this data to figure out the true value of these securities.
Sounds a lot like what he did with blackjack, actually, just on a much larger, more complex scale.
Precisely. And just like with card counting, he knew it wasn't enough to just identify the opportunities. He also had to manage the risk.
Right, because even if you're right 90% of the time, that other 10% can really hurt you.
Exactly. So he developed hedging strategies, ways to minimize his losses, even if the market moved against him. It was a whole new way of approaching investing, based on math and data, rather than intuition or guesswork.
And did it work? Did this radical approach actually make money?
It did. His hedge fund, Princeton Newport Partners, was incredibly successful, consistently outperforming the market, even during times of economic uncertainty. But Thorpe is honest in his book. It wasn't always easy.
I bet. Wall Street is a tough crowd. What were some of the challenges he faced?
Well, for one, the competition was fierce. Once word got out about what he was doing, other firms started trying to replicate his strategies. And the market itself is constantly evolving, so he had to constantly adapt, refine his models, stay one step ahead.
It's like a game of cat and mouse, only the stakes are billions of dollars.
Exactly. And of course, there's the human element. Thorpe talks about encountering greed, ego, people willing to bend the rules, or even break them for a bigger piece of the pie.
Did he ever get caught up in any of that?
He seems to have steered clear of the really shady stuff. He's very principled. But there's this one story he tells about a certain Bernie Madoff,
Wait, Bernie Madoff as in the Bernie Madoff? The Ponzi scheme guy?
the one and only. This was years before Madoff's scheme blew up, but Thorpe had his suspicions way back then.
Seriously. How?
A potential investor approached Thorpe, someone who'd been getting these crazy returns with Madoff. Thorpe, being Thorpe, decided to take a look at the numbers.
What did he find?
Let's just say the numbers weren't adding up. Thorpe suspected that Madoff was faking trades, creating this illusion of outsized returns. But he couldn't prove it definitively at the time.
Wow. That's incredible. Thorpe had his number all those years ago.
It goes to show that even in the world of high finance, with all its complexities and algorithms, sometimes the best tool you have is a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to trust your gut.
Absolutely. So we've gone from counting cards to cracking Wall Street. What an incredible journey.
It really is. Edward Thorpe's story is a testament to the power of a curious mind, the willingness to challenge assumptions, and the belief that even in the most complex systems, there are patterns to be found, edges to be gained. If you're interested in exploring those ideas further, Thorpe's autobiography, A Man for All Markets, is a must-read. It's a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a true pioneer. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.